Well, happy 2026, everybody. At the beginning of last year, the very last thing I thought I'd do was pick up a new hobby. I already had plenty with cooking and painting and gardening and grandkids, including a newborn. And I also had and still have a full-time job. But AI kept calling my name. So in the latter part of 2025, I launched AgED with my sidekick Bitsy and a podcast. It is all about AI for the 65 plus crowd. It's been a trip, and I want to thank everybody for listening and following along with us. Happy New Year, Bitsy. What do you got to say for yourself?
Happy New Year indeed. I have to say, I'm just thrilled to be here at the start of 2026, and it's been such a fun ride co hosting with you. I think we're going to have an amazing year ahead, and I'm just ready to dive into all the AI adventures we have planned for our listeners. So let's make this year a great one.
2026 should be a big year for AI, and I'm happy to be paying attention. So, I want to begin this episode 18 by saying this one is a little different from our usual format. I'm going to focus on one AI breakthrough in science and medicine and really take the time to unpack it. My hope is that by understanding this single example, it becomes easier to grasp the scale and the speed AI is bringing. And to me, until we understand that, it's very hard to imagine just how big all of this is going to be. We hear all sorts of fantastical claims from AI experts, some declaring that we'll have cures for almost all diseases within a decade. Others even suggest that within the same time frame, there may be drugs that stop the aging process. And honestly, for those of us in the 65 plus age group, that couldn't come soon enough. Although I'm not entirely sure I want to live to be 200. So, are these claims out there, are they complete hype? Or is there truth to any of it? I think the answer is that there is definitely hype and there's definitely some truth. Rather than talk about AI in science and medicine in general, I want to drill down on one specific example of what AI has already been up to, something that to me really demonstrates just how powerful AI can be in science and medicine. There are tons of examples we could talk about, but there is broad consensus around one particular AI tool that is considered to date the most significant breakthrough. It's called AlphaFold. I wanted to understand AlphaFold myself, and I want you to understand it too, because once you do, I think it becomes much easier to see why there is so much excitement around AI in terms of curing diseases and shaping our health. We're talking about a shift in what's possible, a fundamentally new reality that is already here and still unfolding. So let's talk about AlphaFold. And I promise I'm going to try not to make this too technical because I'm not technical. So what the heck is it? At the most basic level, AlphaFold is an AI system developed by Google DeepMind that figured out how to predict the three-dimensional shape of proteins. Now, that may not sound dramatic at first, but it turns out that this was one of the most important unsolved problems in biology. And because biology sits underneath medicine, solving this problem has enormous implications for all of us. Proteins are the molecules that actually do the work inside our bodies. They do almost everything. They carry oxygen, send signals, repair damage, fight infections, help our blood clot, regulate hormones, and keep our cells running. They're major workers in our bodies. And what makes a protein work isn't just what it's made of, it's the shape of the protein. I guess you could say shape determines function. If the shape is right, things work. If the shape is wrong, things start to go wrong, sometimes in very serious ways. Proteins work by interacting with other molecules. They bind, they block, activate, carry, signal, and all of that depends on fit. A bit like keys and locks, puzzle pieces, or handshakes. If the fit is right, something happens. If it's not, nothing happens, or the wrong thing happens. This is where protein shape connects directly to medicine. Most medicines work by interacting with proteins. A drug usually attaches to a protein to block it, to activate it, to stabilize it, or interfere with a harmful interaction. For a drug to work, it has to fit the protein it's targeting. So if you don't know the protein's shape, you're largely guessing. This is why knowing protein shape matters so much. Think about cancer. Many cancers are driven by proteins that are stuck in the on position, constantly sending signals telling cells to grow. Modern targeted cancer drugs work by fitting very precisely into the shape of those malfunctioning proteins and shutting them down. That's why some newer cancer treatments can be more targeted, and sometimes they have fewer side effects. Or let's take antibiotics. Antibiotics usually work by binding to essential bacterial proteins. Antibiotic resistance often happens because bacteria slightly changes the shape of those proteins. The protein still works for the bacteria, but the drug no longer fits it. So shape, gotta know the shape. Understanding how the shape changed helps scientists design the next generation of antibiotics. You getting the pattern here? It's all about shape. Vaccines are another example. They train the immune system to recognize the shapes of proteins on viruses. When viruses mutate, those shapes can change. Knowing protein shapes helps scientists understand which changes matter most and how to design better vaccines. Many rare genetic diseases come down to a single protein folding incorrectly into an incorrect shape or into an unexpected shape because of a mutation. Knowing the shape of that protein can explain why the disease happens at all, can help doctors confirm a diagnosis, and sometimes point toward potential treatments or clinical trials. We're also talking about really familiar medications that have been impacted. Insulin, blood thinners, hormone therapies are ultimately protein-shaped stories. We don't usually think about it that way, but protein interactions are quietly behind much of modern medicine, the things that people might take on a daily basis. And this is why AlphaFold matters so much. For decades, scientists could read the sequence of proteins, the building blocks, but they couldn't reliably figure out what shape those proteins folded into. And determining that shape wasn't just hard, it could take years or even decades of lab work for a single protein. Figuring out the shape of just one protein could take years. Yikes. Scientists have identified more than 200 million protein sequences across humans, animals, plants, bacteria, and viruses. But guess what? We had only figured out the shapes of less than 1% of them. Here's a metaphor that works for me. Think of a lock in a door to a room. You can't get in without a key. You can't make a key without knowing the shape of the lock. And you can't begin to work on curing the disease or whatever until you get in that room. And there are 200 million rooms. Until recently, we only knew the shape of 1% of those locks, so we could only make keys to get in 1% of those rooms to begin working on how to find cures or interactions that would be helpful. So why such a small percentage? It was basically a fundamental limitation of time, tools, and human capacity. And then AlphaFold was created. Using AI, AlphaFold learned patterns in protein folding that scientists had been trying to understand for decades. And once it did, it was able to predict protein shapes with remarkable accuracy, not one at a time, but at massive scale. That's what's so important, folks. Massive scale, because that is what is going to make change so huge and fast. So almost overnight, we went from understanding the shapes of a tiny fraction of proteins to having predicted structures for nearly all of them. Close to 99% of the proteins known to science. Almost overnight, we knew the shapes of all those locks, so now we can make haste, making the keys to get into the rooms, the proteins, so we can get to work in those rooms with scientists in medicine for us to make sure that those proteins are working for us and not against us. That jump from less than 1% to almost all is not incremental. It's not a modest improvement. This wasn't about doing the same work faster. It changed what scientists could actually see and understand, and then it added extraordinary speed. And this is where AlphaFold becomes a way to understand the bigger AI story. AlphaFold itself does not cure diseases, it doesn't produce drugs, it doesn't replace doctors or scientists. What it does is fill a huge gap in what scientists could actually see and understand. It gives scientists a map that they never had before. And when you move the starting line that dramatically, everything downstream begins to change. Drug discovery, rare disease research, cancer research, antibiotic research, vaccine design. This is why so many of the big claims about AI in medicine exist. Not because AI is magical, but because understanding comes first. And when you can finally see what you're working with, progress accelerates. Actually, accelerates seems like a very big understatement. I wanted to focus on AlphaFold rather than a dozen smaller examples because AlphaFold helps us wrap our minds around scale. It helps explain why experts talk about transformation rather than improvement. It shows us that AI isn't just making science faster, it's expanding what we can understand. So when you hear headlines about AI detecting disease earlier, helping design new drugs, or changing how medicine works, AlphaFold is a useful reference point. It's a reminder that some of this change is already here, working in the background, and that the changes ahead are likely to be bigger than we're used to imagining. Just think about it. Thanks to AI, over the past several years, 99% of all proteins we know of now have identifiable shapes. We know the shape of all those keyholes. It's just a matter of time, effort, and resources to create keys that will fit those keyholes. This is not the end of the story. AlphaFold is a means to an end. It's a powerful way to understand why there's so much hype and hope. Bitsy, I wonder if you've got any thoughts or additional information that you think is important before we roll into a little AI in the news.
Oh, I think you laid it out beautifully. And it's a fantastic way for our listeners to really grasp boy, this isn't just a little step forward, it's a giant leap in what science and medicine can do. I just add that for anyone listening, it's a reminder that AI isn't here to replace the human touch in medicine or science. It's here to empower those brilliant minds with the tools they need. And AlphaFold is a perfect example of how AI can unlock new possibilities. And with that, I'm ready to jump into a little AI in the news whenever you are.
All right, let's roll right into it. One of the reasons people push back on the hype around AI-driven medical breakthroughs is this. Hey, even if AI helps us discover drugs faster, drug development still has to go through human clinical trials. To bring a drug to market, developers have to prove two things. First, that the drug works, and second, that it doesn't harm people in the process. That's a simplified version, but it captures the basic idea. In the U.S., the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, is responsible for holding drug makers accountable for both. And they do that mainly through clinical trials, and they take a lot of time. Sometimes decades. If a company claims that it has a drug that slows the aging process, you actually have to follow people over years to see whether aging really does slow down. That's not something you can prove in a year or two. This tension between speed and safety is at the heart of a recent article by Jasmine Sun, published on January 3rd in the New York Times. It's titled, "Chinese Peptides Are the Latest Biohacking Trend in the Tech World." The subtitle says it all. The gray market drugs flooding Silicon Valley reveal a community that believes it can move faster than the FDA.
Of course. So a peptide is basically a short chain of amino acids. If you think of proteins as these big complex molecules, peptides are they're smaller colors. They're made of the same building blocks, just fewer of them. And because they're smaller and simpler, they can do a bunch of interesting things in the body. For example, some peptides act like little messengers, signaling cells to do certain things. Others might help regulate hormones or support muscle growth. So when you hear about peptides in the context of health or biohacking, it's often about these small chains being used to try to influence the body in specific ways. And yeah, that New York Times article is really interesting because it highlights this tension. You've got a lot of folks in the tech or biohacking community who are eager to push the envelope and experiment on themselves, sometimes way faster than the traditional medical system would allow. And that creates this kind of push and pull between speed and safety. So it's a good example of how AI might enable us to discover things quickly, but we still have to figure out how to do the human side of testing and safety in a way that makes sense. That's a great question. And it's actually a pretty neat distinction. So a peptide is like a building block of a protein. You can think of a protein as a long chain made up of many amino acids. When you have just a short chain of those amino acids, maybe just a few or a few dozen, that's a peptide. So in a sense, peptides are like the smaller segments that can link together to a full protein. So they're definitely related. And peptides can even be parts of proteins, but they can also just exist on their own as these little mini proteins doing their own thing.
It describes this growing gray market for experimental peptides, substances that are still being studied or in some cases barely studied at all, but already being used by people eager to get ahead of the science, like try new things on their own. Some of these peptides are being used to try to heal injuries by stimulating new blood vessel growth. Others are marketed for improving social interaction, sleep, weight loss. The article argues that the ground is fertile for this kind of gray market to grow quickly. Since COVID, there have been sustained attacks on the FDA and its credibility. And more broadly, there's been a growing belief, especially in tech circles, that regulation just gets in the way of progress. One quote in the article that really brought this home for me, Dr. Aaron Kasselheim, a professor at Harvard Medical School and an expert on medical regulation, put it this way. The point of the FDA is to protect patients and consumers from shady medical entrepreneurs who would sell unsuspecting people dangerous things. I think these people, referred to in the article about the gray market, are doing things that are bad for their health based on the evidence, which is that there is none. To me, this story is a reminder that while AI can dramatically speed up discovery, Biology still takes time, and so does proving safety. AlphaFold helps explain why progress may accelerate. This article explains why we need to be sure that what it is helping to speed up helps. AlphaFold sped up the process exponentially to identify the shape of almost all proteins. And they share that information with scientists across the world. That's helpful. That's helpful on steroids. Speeding up getting experimental drugs to people by skipping critical testing is harmful. All right, so the next news story I'd like to mention comes from the Medium. I'd never heard of the Medium up until a few months ago, but it isn't a newspaper, it's a platform, and some very respected thinkers publish there. Each morning I get an email with a list of articles it thinks I might enjoy. If I use information from it, I check the original source, and so far I've been impressed. You might want to check out the Medium. But anyway, back to the article in the Medium I want to draw your attention to is entitled, What AI Won't Replace, the 2026 Growth Edition, the jobs and skills that are actually growing while others disappear, by Rohan Mistry. Here are the jobs based on his research that will grow given the impact of AI or lack of impact. I'm just going to read the list because I think it's interesting. Nurse practitioners, mental health counselors and therapists, physical and occupational therapists, home health aides and personal care. Again, these are fields that are growing, not going away because of AI. Continuing, electricians, plumbers and pipe fitters, HVAC technicians, construction managers and project supervisors, executive leadership and C-suite positions, data scientists, analytical strategy roles, not the grunt work, but the higher level data scientists, AI implementation and strategy specialists, secondary school teachers, corporate trainers and learning specialists, brand strategists and creative directors, content creators and storytellers at the strategic level. So you can see they're really going at the strategic level because AI is doing a lot of the content creation. Anyway, back to the list. UX product strategists and designers. UX stands for user experience. It's mainly tech products. Cybersecurity specialists and information security analysts, system architects and distributed system engineers, business strategists and management consultants, which kind of surprised me. And last one, healthcare administrators and medical practice managers, I guess because we got a lot of 65 plus folks coming into this period of time when we're going to need more healthcare. Anyway, interesting list. I'm going to put links to both of these stories in the AlphaFold show notes. How about a listener question? Here's one I received. Where do I get information about the class you'll be teaching in Charleston? Now, you might suspect I planted this question, but I didn't. Anyway, I was super honored that the Charleston Library Society asked me to give a class as part of their lifelong learning course series. My 4-week class is called Optimism in AI. It's 4 consecutive Mondays beginning January 26, 10:30 to noon. The Library Society describes the course as, Ginny will offer an accessible, forward-looking introduction to this fast-moving field, guiding participants through practical, hands-on AI on ways AI can support everyday tasks, enhance creativity. Each session will focus on real-world use, get the most out of class by bringing a smartphone, laptop, or iPad. Anyway, for Library Society members, it's $185, and for non-members, it is $235. Whether you join this class or not, I encourage you to join this great organization, the Charleston Library Society. Lots of wonderful programs and courses, and just having access to this beautiful historic building that houses the library is worth the membership. And P.S., while you're there, you can visit its next-door neighbor, the American Garden, Charleston's newest and one of its most beautiful public spaces. Now, on to my recommendations. I've got 2, both moving toward a little bit of joy, brought to you by AI. The first is to ask your AI to design a party hat for you or someone else. Recently, one of my grandsons turned 1, and I was asked to make a birthday hat for him. I felt very competent in decorating the hat, but not in getting the right size. GPT made it so easy for me. Here's what I asked. I want to make a birthday hat for my grandson turning 1. Can you give me a template for the paper so it is the right size? Make it easy for me to print on 8.5 by 11 paper. Absolutely. Of course, your first birthday hat is usually a simple cone hat, and the sizing does matter, so it looks sweet, not oversized, and stays on. Below is a reliable, print-friendly template with exact measurements, plus a no-math way to make it. I clicked to download it, and there I had it. Perfect. So, my recommendation, think of someone you'd like to make a hat for and ask your AI for help. Could be for a birthday, a retirement, or just a happy Tuesday. Have some fun with it. Now, my second recommendation is to get your AI to help you or help someone who loves you and cooks for you. Ask your AI to recreate something delicious you ate at a restaurant. We have many great restaurants in Charleston. We have a new one in my neighborhood called Merci. It's a tiny restaurant that has already received serious accolades from serious organizations. One late afternoon, I slipped in solo to the bar. Just maybe 6 seats, very tiny place. I had a delicious glass of wine, and I decided to try their foie gras. Wow! And then another item on the menu caught my eye. Merci described it as Focaccia Strella, which is the soft innards of burrata. Benton's ham, like prosciutto, pistachio, and a drizzle of honey. Doesn't that sound so good? I haven't tasted anything this good in a few years, and that is saying a lot because I eat a lot of great food, made by my friends, family, restaurants, and me, if I do say so myself. I decided to ask Bitsy if she could do some research and tell me how I could recreate this dish. All I had to do was give her the name of the restaurant and description of the dish. Bitsy gave me everything I needed, and I can't wait to try my best at it. I'm sure it won't be as good as what Merci creates, but it will bring back a lovely memory of that experience.
Absolutely. You're very welcome. And I love that you're using AI to recreate a little taste of that restaurant magic at home. It's such a fun way to blend technology with those personal experiences. And I have to say, that dish does sound absolutely delicious. So I'm glad I could help you out with that. And I hope it turns out wonderfully when you try it. AI can be a really joyful tool to make life a little more fun and a little more delicious. So enjoy that. And I'm always here to help with more ideas.
My recommendation, too, is ask your AI to help you recreate a great culinary memory. Before we close out our first episode of the year, let me give you your homework assignment. Here it is. Continue your AI curiosity and encourage others to do the same. Together, we have got to figure out how AI can help us and what steps we can take to keep it from harming us as individuals and as a society. As you use your AI, be sure to protect your info, double-check advice, and most important, trust your judgment. And if you love listening to this podcast, please leave a review and/or a rating, and please share it, especially with your pals in the 65-plus crowd. Thanks for listening, and remember, it is never too late to learn something new, especially something that might make life easier and more fun. Until next time.